you can hear me well. This meeting will be recorded, but I think it's very important to say that it's going to be recorded just the part where we'll have the presentation, but not so much the discussion, the Q&A portion of this webinar. So again, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for being here. My name is Alexandra Wancă, and I'm a postdoctoral associate at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the K11 in Belgium. And I'm currently also serving as the Vice President of the European Association of Social Anthropologists, of EASA, on their executive committee. And as some of you might know through the elections, I'm very much committed to strengthening the EASA's mental health agenda and tying that with a prior discussion we had on academic precarity. So for us, I think that it's very important to put more forward that commitment to mental health agenda on the concerns of the European Association of Social Anthropologists, but generally also for social anthropologists within Europe. And we thought, what better time to do that than today on the Global Mental Health Day, October 10th, and it was a way to actually bring that discussion forward. I also wanted to briefly discuss some of the activities which EASA has been doing, which address issues of academic precarity. I'm thinking here both of the funding grants for precarious scholars and for network organizing, but also the sort of topic which has been both part of a very important part for the Precantro Collective, from which I'm part of, but which was mobilized and which appeared in 2016 in order to raise awareness about the challenges of developing an academic career in anthropology. So generally, Precantro has been very influential in putting forward the academic, precarity on the agenda of EASA. And as some of you know, the precarity report, which appeared in 2018, was very influential in those initiatives, which was written by Martin Pota, Maria Ivanceva, and Raluca Perneș. And we have with us Maria Ivanceva, who will both talk about the precarity report, but also about her activities as the president of EASA and also as part of one of the founding members of Precantro. Another initiative which was put forward within EASA was the draft of good practice guidelines in collaborative research. Issues about data ownership, authorship, and power were very much important in that initiatives, and which were developed by Alice Tilke and Rita Astuti. And why I put this on the board, I think that it's very important to think about some of these initiatives which EASA has been put forward and which were very important in highlighting ways in which mental health struggles and were part of the activities and part of the lives of social anthropologists in Europe, even though they weren't addressed as such as mental health struggles, but they were part and parcel of academic precarity, of the problems of sometimes working in collaborative research and some of the struggles which that came into be. So I think that Precantro and EASA has put so much academic precarity on the forefront. And throughout the years, we also noticed, and we lived, all of us both noticed, and some of us also lived through rising mental health crisis in academia, and and I would say also rising awareness of mental health struggles, both for students and for staff alike. And I might not be the only one, but our universities, right, put so much free yoga sessions and mindfulness initiatives as part of a way to address mental health struggles. But of course, how can one, we can't self-care our way out of systemic oppression, and we cannot address necessary systematic overwork, academic precarity, and mental health struggles through this free yoga and mindfulness sessions, which, we all like yoga, but most of us like yoga and mindfulness sessions, but right, it's somehow tricky to see our universities and our work environments address that through this way. So I think that for us in EASA, it has been really important to collaborate with other initiatives which attempted to put forward and to understand researchers' mental health and generally how can that be approached. And that's one of the reasons why we reached out to ReMO COS, to the Researcher Mental Health Observatory COS Action, the ReMO COS. And here we have Brian Cahill, who is the grant manager of ReMO COS, and also Luisa Soms, who is a member of ReMO. So we have two members of these organizations with us so that we can understand some of their initiatives which they have implemented in order to put this agenda forward. So now I will briefly introduce the speakers in the order in which they are going to present. So first of all, we have Dr. Maria Ivancheva, an anthropologist and sociologist of higher education and labor, and she will give a brief presentation both of the precarity report, but also of her own research on the casualization and digitalization of academic labor, followed by the presentation by Dr. Brian Cahill, who works in the Learning Skills and Analytics Lab at the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology, and who is also the grant manager of ReMO. And last but not least, Luisa Soms, a PhD candidate at the Department of Work and Organizational Psychology at the University of Amsterdam. So Luisa has, will contribute to the discussion in a variety of ways, both as a member of ReMO, but also as the co-host of the podcast PhD Unplugged, and not to mention her own academic research on the well-being and career experiences of PhD candidates, which are central themes in her work. So I think without further ado, I will give the floor to our first speaker, Maria. And after the very short presentations of the three speakers, around 10 to 15 minutes each, we will have a Q&A with the audience. So thank you so much. And Maria, the floor is yours.
No, let me thank you, Alexandra. You see my screen, I'm hoping, and thanks to the current EASA exec, Alexandra, Anna, the president, who I saw here, as well as others, for organizing this event and for reminding us of this work that we did within the previous two execs in a certain way. What I'll do briefly today is to present some of the findings of the report, and then I'll speak a bit about and some of the premises, where it came from, and then I'll speak a bit about the kind of other side, what of this whole idea of why should we care, if we're to abolish the university and so forth, why do we still care about making research in and being active at the university as a workplace? So in a certain way, and what I'll do also is to speak a bit about my new research, but not with academics, but with trainee counselors, so therapists, because it seems that the precarity in the academic profession also affects counselors these days. And I will try to connect this piece together. So just starting now. So, the rationale of the survey, this report started from the almost the inception of Precantro in 2016. We wanted to run a survey within anthropology. And what we wanted to do is to see if and how trends that already are documented in other disciplines and in academia affect anthropology. So the growing division between research and teaching, the cyclical fundraising and work within big grants that sometimes infringes on authorship rights and intellectual property, the de-skilling of academic labor and multiplication of contract types, decreasing support and increasing overtimes, the imperatives of international and interinstitutional mobility, and the weak labor unions that we're all encountering. And so the report captures overall trends and regional differences in the anthropological career in Europe, but it is well known as the precarity report, partly because it came from the group Precantro, But it does capture the careers of all members of EASA who decided to respond to it, but also because it really came from our preoccupation of a casualization on a broader level of the profession, not just the structural precarity of loss of recognition, redistribution, and representation, but also of the growing lack of agency, visibility, ability to plan for the future, access to solidarity, care, and love, and freedom from the state and the market that we're seeing within the academic profession. We had about 35% of the EASA members at the time, 2018-19, that responded, 809 people, which I'm just showing that were quite representative of the population overall in terms of age composition and gender composition. And a lot of them were based in the United Kingdom and Germany, but that's not untypical for the academic profession in general. These are the two countries with the highest number of universities in Europe. And we also had like a majority of people, over 80%, based in academia, either as PhD students or workers, which is perhaps more typical of a learned society. But we couldn't capture those who couldn't pay their fees or some who have left. So that's another piece of work that we should be doing. We saw that there was a prevalence of people having at least one fixed term contract with the average duration of 26 or more months. And 49%, so half of those employed in academia, were on fixed term contracts at present. There were no gender differences in overall, but it was clear that those on very short-term contracts and not that many of those who were on a longer contracts were women. And then there were differences among countries and regions. And so only 29% of the respondents, on 1/3, had permanent contracts, and of them, permanent and full-time contracts were only available to 1/4, about 1/4 of the people. And it seemed that the lower you went into the academic ranking, the less probability was that contracts were permanent. There was also, the average age of a permanent grant holder was about 50 years. And there were quite a few years, and in some countries, much larger numbers of how many years you have to wait until, to try to get a permanent job. With German-speaking countries scoring higher on that one, but Eastern and Central Europe as well. And then the other question that we were asking was about writing public applications, because it seemed that one of the issues that was across the board was that a lot of people were spending exorbitant amount of time writing funding applications. So we accounted that there might be about 1,000 hours per person on average that are spent on writing grant applications, and only 10% of people have not been engaged in that. So that's a lot of time to be spending, instead of doing research, actually writing grant applications. So these are the countries where there are many precarious academics. Like you can see that Germany scores 75%, which is quite frightening. But also there was a lot of anxiety, and a lot of people were saying that even if most of those who are precarious wanted a permanent job, they found it quite unlikely that they will ever get one. And still a lot were hoping and staying in academia instead of, trying to move out. And then there was a lot of economic precarity. So there were a lot of people depending on partners or family or other income in order to be able to sustain an academic career. So academia starts extracting from our personal relationships. And there was also a kind of sense that if there were any emergent kind of problem, for instance, a health issue, a lot of people could not afford to solve it. So they could only live by the end of the month. And then what we found out is there was a lot of reporting of discrimination, harassment, abuse, and unequal treatment. A lot of people experienced it directly. so not just as witnesses and bystanders. Then there was a bigger piece to be made around especially racial and ethnic discrimination that needs more research, a bit better. Class differences are a bit, and gender better covered in academia, but racial and ethnic discrimination still not so. And a lot of this was rooted in big projects, because a lot of these big projects are the way that we were analyzing back then, the root of some exploitation within academia. So we were seeing that anthropology in Europe was ever more precarious, and that a lot of time was spent on overtime, unpaid work, especially on public applications. And that PhD students were increasingly supporting themselves instead of getting grants, and unions were irrelevant and redundant and offered inadequate support, especially to precarious folk, but not only. And so what we recommended back then was something like a Tina Swan-like monitoring and maybe fair hiring awards, which we hope somebody would take up. A career framework for around Europe, which I know that at present the European Commission is working on, and we are in touch with EASA, which is also one of the lobby groups involved in this discussion. But also we need to start thinking on structural terms about the reduction of cyclical project funding and fundraising and workloads through longer-term institutional grants that allow for sustainable research programs instead of this cyclical funding, because that's what exhausts most people and takes a lot of our time. And we need to start thinking of PhDs via employment contracts rather than as stipends, even less so, rather than self-supported studies. And the recommendation was also that societies like EASA do more on this, because we have this kind of strange institutional position to also lobby. But then, so the question then might be, there have been some discussions like in anthropology between Platzer and Allison that initiated it in the American anthropology community. Why not suggesting living and reskilling for greener pastures outside of academia? And I was one of the people that was quite interested about these greener pastures, and actually due to my work in academia, I retrained as a psychotherapist in the last 2 years. So I've just gotten a certificate, and I had to do quite a big placement. Mine was probably the smallest that you get in the UK, 100 hours. And then I started realizing that academia, I realized it even before, but, it was quite eye-opening that we're not in a field where there are that jobs outside of academia are not as precarious. And I mean high-skilled jobs, right? And also that there is something about leaving academia that is quite problematic, because first, we have to recognize some of its faults as well as some of its merit. We have a very hierarchical institutional structure that reproduces power and prestige, and that reproduces much stronger than other professions this idea of aura or character. Whereas the reality of many academics, especially in the younger generation, is this skilled task-based job market increasingly through digital technologies and outsourced services. And there are also the kind of stratification in which on one side you have the VIP, usually white male professor, who is the proponent of an aspirational professional identity, but for whom there are postdocs and teaching replacement staff that work in order for his research and his teaching to be covered. We're also having this disciplines where there's a lot of profiling within narrow disciplinary modes with robust boundaries and very strong mechanisms of othering, and rhythms and rituals of work producing distinctions and make leaving the discipline feel like a professional debt. And this, I think, is quite important to remember. So also, especially in the social sciences, there is a lot of identification with our work and topic. And that's why we often tend to want to sacrifice or give our work for free, call it love, call it passion for the profession, and allow ourselves to be exploited. But this is not only typical for the academic profession, the psychotherapeutic profession, and I'll give the UK as a case because now I studied that as well, is also typical with such an internal stratification which they have allowed, for instance, between therapists and counselors, with a very strong difference between what affordances each one has and how much people have paid into training in order to get out of it. There is a strong feminization and de-skilling of the lower positions as in academia, and there's increasing outsourcing via online therapy and AI bots. But also, and especially in the UK, but this is moving elsewhere as well, we're speaking of each therapist has to do 100 to 400 hours of free labor, meaning unpaid gratuitous labor placement in order to enter the profession to get a first certificate, and sometimes way more in order to get accreditation. And there is low-cost therapy work in NHS, and also I was going to say in charities, but I wrote them below. So in the national services, so this is really unpaid and underpaid work that is very stressful with very high workloads. And what we see in the UK especially is the big society of David Cameron in action, in which a lot of therapy work and sometimes of the most difficult cases is outsourced to charities and that run a lot of volunteer programs. And there is an oversubscription of services and a short circuit that doesn't allow for the therapeutic relationship to develop. So just as an example, like therapy is both what's happened, what therapy I think is now an interesting professional field to see both, how casualization is happening across different sectors, but also to understand how a lot of the people that are providing therapies for us in academia within a very kind of big mental health epidemic are currently also suffering the same violence that we're suffering in our profession. And I'll finish here, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Maria. I'll just leave the floor to Brian. Go ahead, Brian. You should unmute yourself.
Okay, I have unmuted myself, and I will share my screen right now. We've been doing Google for so long. So my name is Brian Cahill, and I am the grant manager of the ReMO Cost Action, and I work at the TIB, that's the Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology in Hanover in Germany, in the Learning and Skills Analytics group. Firstly, I will start with how I got involved with these sort of topics. I'm a mechanical engineer. So I have no kind of disciplinary background in this topic, but between 2016 and 2018, I was the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and I think it became clear to kind of us and also many of the other kind of representative organizations, Eurodoc, and so on, that there was an issue regarding mental health among particular early career researchers, but not just early career researchers. We started to put together a group of people to work on the topic. I think initially we had a number of sessions at our annual conference at the beginning of 2018. And then a couple of months later, we published an article in the Neuroscientist magazine about increasing awareness of researcher mental health. Directly, and we could see kind of at the time on the Neuroscientist magazine, we could see how many people had read the article, and it was kind of like far ahead any of the other articles on the webzine. So after that, we submitted we had submitted a proposal for a session at the Neuroscience Open Forum, and ESOF is kind of the largest general science conference in Europe. It's not really focused on academia as such, it's more focused on the relationship of science to society. So it has a lot of content about science communication, contributions from policymakers, from people from funding agencies, from many stakeholders in research. And kind of we found that at this conference, we had a workshop session, and it was quite well attended, even though it was the last session of the day before the ESOF party. And two journalists attended, and they both published kind of articles in Science and Nature in the weeks after the conference. What we had tried to do with the session was to reach out to researchers who were working in the field. One of those was Katja Levesque, who had just published a paper that had got a lot of interest. And we had also kind of asked a counsellor from Trinity College Dublin, from the counselling service there, as well as early career researchers, group leaders, people with kind of diverse involvement in this problem. Just to look at Katja Levesque's paper that came out in 2017, that she applied the same kind of methodology that she had applied to many other target groups. And when she applied this to PhD students in Flanders, what came out was quite upsetting. And kind of it attracted a lot of attention, because she found that the PhD students in Flanders had 2 to 3 times the scores of comparable highly educated young people. So I think that if kind of 40% felt under constant strain in comparison with 27% of the control group, and kind of go all the way down through the 12 kind of items that are used in the general health questionnaire to assess kind of depression, and that kind of these kind of like more than 3 times as many felt worthless, kind of twice as many were not feeling happy, all things considered, and so on. So this was quite clear that there was a very big difference between the PhD students and everybody else in comparable jobs. At the same time, kind of that was kind of August 2018, there was a big scandal in the Max Planck PhD net, where a researcher who was an expert in empathy was accused of misconduct within her lab and bullying and harassment. And the speaker of the Max Planck PhD net came out almost immediately, and she published a position paper on power abuse and conflict resolution. So and this was taken up at the Max Planck Society, so that they reformed the way that PhD students were supervised and also evaluated in PhD exams. So there was much greater movement towards thesis committees. So kind of this is something that we saw that we would like to work with the Max Planck PhD net, and for very good reasons. So if you look at the data from the Max Planck PhD net survey, it's many of the same things that Maria was talking about, that you can see kind of that it had kind of a total number of responses of over 2,000, and across the humanities, chemistry, physics, technology, and also the biomedical sciences. And I think that kind of from the point of view of disciplinary focus, there's not much of a difference, but we do see that the biomedical sciences come out worse. And I think that kind of there is huge amounts of overwork in the life sciences, people working. Then with the kind of you can see that the depression among Germans is lower than among EU citizens, is lower than among kind of people who aren't EU citizens. So kind of, as you can see, that kind of when people, the less societally secure you are, the more kind of you're affected by anxiety. Kind of women are affected more than men, but what is most striking is that kind of from first year to second year to third year, that's kind of that you see kind of 40% have high anxiety, 58% in third year and above, so that you can see that kind of there's something within the process of doing PhD that's affecting the researchers. Also, kind of top of the list is conflict with the supervisor, and kind of the relationship between anxiety and depression to satisfaction with supervisor is very, very clear. So kind of the PhD candidates who are very satisfied with their supervisor are in general more satisfied. I think that one thing that we do see is that that there's kind of PhD-net survey that kind of around 75% are somewhat satisfied with their supervision, but there's 25% who are kind of rather dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. I also have a slide about research precarity, and it also shows that in Germany, 75% of, in this case, these are corresponding authors, kind of papers. This was a survey done by the OECD. They used, I guess they used kind of the email that kind of corresponding authors put in papers to contact those authors. And so if 75% of the corresponding authors in Germany under 45 are on fixed term contracts, that means that most of these are probably senior postdocs or are already junior research group leaders. So I think this means that kind of Switzerland, Germany, Austria, USA, Italy, India, the Netherlands, China, and so on. So this is kind of in Europe is largely kind of the German-speaking countries, but I think on the bottom end of the scale, you have France and Great Britain, where kind of that there is still some permanent positions below the position of full professor. In the German-speaking countries, is mainly if you get full professor, you are become permanent, and kind of this has become quite an issue over the last year and a half or so through the Ich bin Hanne movement, which has really kind of campaigned mainly on Twitter against precarious employment in the sciences. We decided to set up a cost action to build a network on this topic because kind of a cost action allows us to build a network of kind of similar people from kind of researcher organizations, but also researchers, practitioners, and people from research management. And kind of it gave us funding to organize meetings, to give small grants for short-term scientific missions, to organize training school. We have an ambassador training school every year, and some money for communication and dissemination activities and virtual networking. We have kind of people involved from all of the possible cost countries, apart from Luxembourg and Georgia, and we have contact to somebody from two people from Luxembourg over the last few weeks, and also somebody from Georgia. And we also have people from some of the near neighbor countries, mainly in North Africa, Morocco, and Tunisia, and also Azerbaijan. And we also have people from outside Europe, Argentina, Colombia, Hong Kong, South Africa, United States. Even since I made these slides, we have somebody from Iran joined one of our working groups. We have many researcher organizations involved in the project, many people from universities, but kind of the Marie Curie alumni, Vitae, which is a charity in the UK focused on researcher career development, Euroscience, the Euraxis network has been a big contributor. They're like national contact points in the countries for advising institutions on implementing EU research and innovation policy. And Eurodoc is the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, have been very supportive of our work, and also Dragonfly Mental Health. We have 3 working groups, the first of which is focused on the systemic level, so the European research area, so on policy. Working group 2 is focused on institutional practices, is also running our survey. And working group 3 is focused on bottom-up activities, on kind of mainly on practitioners, but on activism. In the first year, we published a manifesto that summed up our work and kind of how we planned to run our action and what issues were important to us. And this has been, we published this on Zenodo. There's a QR code if you want to look it up. So we called to transform the research ecosystem to benefit mental health and well-being, to foster and sustain mental health and well-being by design through institutional change to our research culture, and we called for researcher empowerment. And this is also summed up in a paper that we published on the well-being and mental health of doctoral candidates. We recently launched our survey. If you click the QR code, this will bring you to, you can fill it out. And if you can disseminate this survey among your networks, in your institutions, in the researcher organizations that you're involved in, this would be very, very helpful. This survey aims to be the largest survey of researcher mental health within Europe ever. And it's also kind of the case that much of the academic work that has been done on mental health has been in the UK, in Germany, in Belgium, in Australia, the US. But we have many countries involved in our network where there is very little data available. And this is a way for us to have easily comparable data across a large number of European countries. We run a webinar, roughly one per month. I think our last webinar before this one was about the European Commission's recommendation for a new charter for researchers, which we lobbied that it would include mental health, and it does. So I think that employers should provide a working environment that promotes the mental health and well-being of researchers, including appropriate procedures for preventing and tackling gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. So I think this is something that will have to be addressed by human resources in universities throughout Europe if it gets accepted by the European Council, which we hope it does. We have a YouTube channel where many of our webinars and conference talks and so on can be accessed. We run an ambassador program every year. I think the next one will be, the first one was in Grenoble, and the last one was in Paris, but next year we will probably go back to Grenoble in France. And this is something where we bring together a group of people from all across Europe, from different backgrounds, and we help them to acquire the skills to advocate for mental health within their institutions and within their countries. We run a conference every year, or for the last 2 years, and we will run one again next year. It was in Budapest, and this year it focused on evidence-based interventions for fostering healthy academic workplaces. And this is something that we also ran in the first year on on bridging research and practice. Over this month, we are running writing sprints, so where we bring together people from different countries in Europe who are writing policy briefs about the situation within their countries, so that they can collectively get the work done to write policy briefs about their countries. So we also have many of our much of the content that we produce is published open access on Zenodo, and this can be downloaded. I think that papers and abstracts from our conference and so on. We also have collected about 1,000 items of evidence that we have published in an evidence hub. It's a Zotero library, which is open to anybody to access, if you're looking for resources in this field. And we also have a podcast. I know that Louisa is going to talk about her podcast, but we also ran one over the first 2 years of the action, so that we place a huge emphasis on communication and dissemination. So if you would like to follow us and to join us, please get in touch, and our website is given there, and my email is also given here, and I will be in the chat if you want to contact me. So thanks for listening, and you're welcome to take part in our network. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think that now Louisa will be spotlighted in just 1 second. So thank you so much, Brian, for sharing with us your lovely work. And now I'll just give the electronic mic to Louisa.
Yes, all right. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. So I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Louisa Zons. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm a trained psychologist, and I'm now part of the Department of Work and Organizational Psychology. So I mainly focus on work-related well-being, and of course, their academic well-being fits right in there. And within my PhD project, I focus on academic well-being and how we can develop and evaluate interventions for academics, but specifically for PhD students. And I will mainly talk about my engagement in ReMO cost action and also about the podcast that we are running. But I will also quickly mention something about the studies and the research that I'm conducting as part of my PhD project. So just a bit of background about the PhD project to start off with. So it's probably good to mention that this is a 4-year project, which is pretty common for Dutch PhD projects. It's internally funded, which also I think showcases nicely that mental health and well-being is already put on the agenda in the Netherlands. So the University of Amsterdam actually said, like, okay, we do see that our employees struggle and we do want to change something and we want to do and investigate this issue more systematically. I'm working together with Maggie van den Heuvel, Barbara Newik, and Astrid Homan. They're all also work in organizational psychologists. So that means that when we look at academics well-being, we always have a work psychology lens on, let's say. So we look at the work demands, the job demands, and the job resources, but also the personal resources that people have at their disposal, and how that can actually lead to well-being or a lack thereof. So that's a little bit of the background. So and as I said, like in my specific project, we tried to, well, first of all, understand PhD students or academics well-being, but in specifically PhD students well-being, but also come up with practical solutions. So that's like two coins of or two parts of the same coin within my project. So I think Brian already explained really nicely why there is, or why there should, why attention should be paid to PhD students or junior researchers in particularly. I've also put it on my slide. So why do we think that we should focus on PhD students? There is evidence of a mental health crisis in PhD students particularly. There's increasing research, and Brian has showed a couple of the papers that nicely show how PhD students suffer. We do know that the risk of developing anxiety or depression is 6 times higher in PhD students than in the normal population. So that is quite upsetting, and I think it shows or it stresses like the importance of actually acting on behalf of PhD students and changing something about the academic system. And I think what we also see if we look at academia, and especially also like within universities themselves, we see that there is a lack of practical support facilities. And I think that comes because PhD students, they kind of fall in between. Often they're no students anymore, but often they also don't count as employees yet, or at least no senior employees. And so sometimes there is it's difficult for them to actually make use of any support that is available within the university. So within my PhD project, we have a couple of research projects or studies that we went over the past years. I'm now in my final year, so I'm coming to the finish line. So first of all, we wanted to, with one of my first studies, we wanted to really try and get an understanding of what are the risk and protective factors of PhD students. And I think it's important to mention that our study is based in the Netherlands, as I said, and that means that probably our results do not always translate to other countries, because in the Netherlands, as some of you may know, these students often are actually employed by the university. That means that they receive a salary from the university. They also receive employment benefits. They mostly work for time, just doing their research. So, for example, financial issues or distress can be assumed to be much lower in the Netherlands compared to other European or non-European countries. But at the same time, although PhD students don't have those financial stressors, we see a lot of shared stressors among PhD students in the Netherlands compared to other countries, such as performance and publication pressures, difficulty to manage work and life. I mean, it's also many PhD students are enter their PhD right after their masters. They're usually younger people who are also thinking about starting a family, for example. So this is a particularly stressful life situation. So there's a lot of just a lot of demands that PhD students have to deal with. And so in this first study, which was a cross-sectional survey study, we tried to understand better what exactly are the factors that contribute to PhD students' well-being and lack thereof. And I just mentioned a couple of factors that we found to be important. What was one of the most important findings was that we saw that personal resources, so not so much resources that exist within the research environment, are important to PhD students, but especially also personal resources such as self-efficacy or resilience were shown to predict well-being outcomes strongly. In our second study, we then developed an intervention based on the outcomes from our first study, where we actually wanted to see if we can develop PhD students' personal resources, such as self-efficacy, through an online intervention. This was all happening during COVID. So unfortunately, we could not meet in person, but we developed an online intervention, and we actually saw that indeed personal resources can be developed, and they also have positive effects on PhD students' well-being. I do want to mention that, of course, these individual level interventions are not the solution. I think we heard it also in the first contribution, where it was pretty much stressed that we need systematic change. And I just want to say that I absolutely agree with this, but we also know, of course, that systematic change takes time, and I therefore think that it's important to also try and develop like tools that we can give to PhD students or other academics to better work with the difficult demands that they have to face in the here and now. So that is why we focused on the individual in our intervention study. We also ran an experience sampling or a diary study where we actually focused on the dynamics. So we looked at well-being over time and how that actually changed from a day-to-day level. And that is our final study is a qualitative study. It's an interview study that we conduct together with researchers in Australia, where we actually want to explore perceptions of academics and across all ranges, from PhD students to full professors, in terms of their career perceptions. So this is just a rough overview of the work that we have been doing in Amsterdam so far. And if you're interested in the research, just let me know, email me, and I can explain a lot more about the findings. Now I want to talk about other activities that I'm involved in, and especially why I joined the ReMO Cost Action, which was actually right after I started my PhD in 2020. So I think for me, when I heard of ReMO, I was very happy, because I felt a bit isolated studying that specific topic, because within my department or within my university, I didn't know anybody that was actually focusing on academic well-being. And then I actually got to know that there's a big network that includes practitioners, includes researchers who are all have this shared interest. So that was really really nice for me to find out. And so I joined ReMO with the idea that I can actually, hopefully be a part of a bigger network of like-minded people, and also find a platform to share my research with. So I'm really happy that I'm here today to talk a bit about the research that we have done so far. After I joined ReMO, so what did it, what did it bring to me? I participated in both the Ambassador Training School in Grenoble and also in the first ReMO conference. So these were both very nice opportunities for me to, first to present my research at a scientific conference, but also to, during the Ambassador Training School, it is really nice that you come into contact with researchers also, and also practitioners from also outside your country. So I think it's a really international environment that you're acting in, and I think that's very enriching, and I really like that a lot. And I think it was interesting that we would also learn about policy making, for example. So something that I would not come across within my research naturally. So it was really an encompassing program where we would learn about research, but also practice and also policy making. So that was really, really nicely done. And I can just recommend to join the Ambassador Training School and the conference as well, of course, if you are in the field. All right, and I also wanted to mention that through ReMO, I was actually able to support a research visit at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So I'm really thankful for that. Brian, he mentioned the short-term scientific missions that ReMO funds. So if you're a researcher in the field and you have a specific idea and you have a partner that you would like to collaborate with, then there are really nice opportunities. And like I said, it's great to be a part of that network and to help also fund some of your research. Lastly, I want to talk about PhD Unplugged. So PhD Unplugged is a coaching podcast for PhD students. In the right corner, you see the QR code. If you scan that, you will be directed to our website. The podcast is hosted by myself and my sister Lara. Lara is not a PhD student anymore. She just obtained her PhD, so she's now a postdoc at the University of Amsterdam, and she's a coaching researcher. So she looks into coaching processes and how coaching works. And so we came up with that idea to basically combine her passion for coaching research with my passion to examine or understand PhD students' well-being and also to provide practical support. And so in this podcast, we always pair a PhD student and a professional coach, and they together talk about a PhD specific struggle or a challenge that the PhD student experiences. And so far we have covered topics such as insecurity, self-compassion, information overload, so how to deal with all the information that you have to process over the course of your PhD, how to deal with stereotypes that some people obviously experience, how to make meaning, also like identity processes. What does it mean? What kind of researcher are you? What kind of work are you looking for, or do you find fulfilling? And how do you deal with work that you probably that does not give you a lot of joy as part of your PhD? And finally, we just released our 6th episode, which was on career planning. So how to actually plan for after your PhD and how to make career decisions. These are the topics that we've just covered so far. We are always looking for PhD students, for coaches who are interested to join our podcast. So if you're interested, you can find the email address on the slide. So please let me know. Also, if you have suggestions for topics, please get in touch. And yeah, I thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Lisa. Okay, so thank you so much. I think at the moment